start now. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Microbiology Journal Club. I'm Faz Alam. This is my colleague and host, Danny Chan, and we're here to talk to you about a scientific paper we've been reading about microbiology called "The Effect of Dexamethasone in Hospitalized Patients with COVID-19."
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, we just finished talking about the phase 1/2 trial of a vaccine candidate, and we're sort of switching gears and going up the phase ladder, right, into a phase 3 study. And also different. This is not a vaccine, right? We're going to talk about therapeutics
yeah,
for when you already have COVID-19.
yeah. And this is in. So if you haven't seen that previous study, jump on. So the link's in description. You can watch for part one, and then we can because we're basically moving up the phases. So we started with phase of one/2, but now phase three, we've got more tried and tested drugs, and then seeing whether they can work in humans. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and this is part of our ongoing sort of exploration of the COVID-19 literature. We've been coming together every week to chat about these papers. On our off weeks, we choose them, and then our on weeks, we go into the figures. And this one's short, right? That's why we decided to split it up this
yeah,
time. But we think it's really exciting because, this is phase 3 data, meaning that they have a very large study powered to see effects. And it was promising. I mean, the news certainly was very positive. The reception to this study was very positive.
yeah. And the part of the thing is that was because this is part of the recovery trial, which is this giant big push
Mhm.
to has a multi-arm study that was started in like March, where they're going to test loads of different drugs and adding more depending on, and it's basically trying to use all the resources of the NHS to try and to find out which drugs would work or not. And there was actually,
Yeah.
in contrast to like the Pfizer study, there is so much like written on this. There's like clinical trial reports, there's statistical like analysis plans, there's so much stuff
hmm
to read on this. But the study itself,
Yeah, because
yeah,
they're running a website to try to give people access to this
yeah,
information, right? Like this is not just like the reporting requirements for a company, right?
yeah,
In order to pass regulation. This is a healthcare system, right? And a group of interested individuals trying to disseminate, right?
yeah,
Yeah, their
yeah,
resources. I think it's kind of cool because even when you read this paper, it reads very much like it's talking about something, not just talking about these results, but all the sort of organizational elements that went into acquiring these results, right? And I feel like there's a little bit of a, pat yourself on the back NHS here
yeah,
moment, right? Where, if you have people who are very organized, you can take a large healthcare system and develop, right, like a robust data gathering strategy on it, on
yeah.
on the back of it.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, this is all very open because the shareholders are the taxpayers. So the part of
hmm
the thing is that they
hmm
want to make sure that everybody can read it, so they can see that they're getting their money's worth. I mean, that's the main concern of the NHS. That the
Sure.
I mean, yeah, and so they got this massive trial. It was including drugs like hydroxychloroquine, tocilizumab. It had, in fact, and it's so weird looking at the because I mean you can read the trial document from when it started, and it lists basically instead of saying dexamethasone, it lists like other steroids or like
Mm.
mild steroids because dexamethasone is a drug that's so generic, it's not even been like name checked in the study that would eventually prove that it's well, I would say prove. I'm not going to say prove, but show that it's going to be quite beneficial.
hmm
So yeah, that's
hmm
been quite interesting because
Yeah, it's like the study's still ongoing,
yeah,
right? And it seems like from what I was reading in the study design is that it's designed in such a way that it can evolve over time. And so like again, we talked about this idea of like you have to say what you're studying first before you go in and you study it, not just like see what came out and then draw the associations. And so again, this is sort of a kudos to the planners, right? To be able to go in and write a document that reportedly gives them the flexibility to update as they go, right? To decide that like, okay, we're going to need more people for this, right? In order to get statistical significance, we want to look at something else. We're not going to be able to look at this. That's all upfront.
yeah,
And then what we're seeing now is a report where they butt off some of that data, right? Specifically looking at dexamethasone and tell us the good news.
yeah, and they're going to be releasing more like trials as it goes because there are so many other arms that are reporting on. I mean, they only recently stopped looking at hydroxychloroquine. Uh,
hmm
so there's been a lot of talk about that drug. It'd be quite interesting to see what their conclusions are about it. Uh,
This was the one that was restarted, right? After,
no, I think
was it originally ended? Or no, that was
that was the
something else.
WHO trial. This trial, I think, kept
Ah,
going on.
this one kept going
I feel the
regardless. Okay.
impression that I got get the impression of that um, because again, their trial documents they list all the kind of changes to what to their
Mm,
history of everything. So they list when they added hydroxychloroquine. I know that they wanted to add remdesivir, but Gilead didn't have enough stocks for this kind of trial because this is going to be massive. Um,
right.
and and also this is so the inclusion criteria for this trial is the people who are already going into hospital or hospitalized. So I
Hmm.
so for an antiviral, I don't think that's necessarily the most fair or favorable test for it because uh, when when the virus is already like in you're only going to hospital already very sick from the coronavirus, you've already got a high viral
Hmm.
titer, and you're already
Yep.
and it's the main like kind of like transmissive phase and more main like kind of expansive phase is over. So it's mostly looking at the
Hmm.
damage that's happening. So it might not so if you're looking at antiviral, what you want to be looking at is a much earlier stage of the infection for
Right.
before it progresses. I so I feel that this is much more favourable the way this study is structured to anti-inflammatories or things that can like help in the hospital situation because that's the situation where people are being picked up on, not people who are feeling slightly ill at work or people who are at home who are experiencing symptoms but not severe ones.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, like the information coming from this is very relevant for like places that are going through the outbreak at the moment,
Yeah,
right? Like where like your hospitals are getting filled up, like what do you do? And then this study is trying to shed some light on that.
and what's impressive is the actual study does take that into account. It takes the clinicians into account very much by saying like, okay, well, if we expect you to be very busy, the amounts of like face masks and other things will not be. So I mean, there's one things where they say like patients who are on oxygen, but then they recognize that the actual decision to put someone on oxygen will change depending on how many oxygen machines are available. So they go, okay,
Hmm.
usually you put people on oxygen if their saturation dips between 94, but we recognize you might do that when it's at 90% or lower, because as your resources get depleted, the decision to put someone on oxygen changes a lot. And
Yeah. Yeah, so like that's why I'm that again, I feel like the paper is written very well in that way, but I guess it's very important to not understate, I think, the how much of an achievement it is to make a study in that style, because what they're essentially doing is saying like doctors are going to be treating people and like doing all this stuff. How can we like put a minimally invasive set of rules around that so that we can collect data from those experiences and report back to everybody, right? Because like that's the whole idea of the like that they could not everyone has to go through like these different like treatment phases, right? It's like if they do go through this treatment, it should be given like this. But if not, then of course we understand because it's the hospital and you have to make decisions on the fly about these patients.
yeah, I mean, they talk about like how in dexamethasone, that if you're dealing with pregnant women, instead of giving dexamethasone, you give them prednisolone. There's very like
Hmm.
a feeling that with this that it's a generic steroid. Um,
Yeah.
but mostly they do
Yeah.
focus in on for this particular study, they do focus in specifically on dexamethasone, and
Right.
yeah, it's quite interesting going through things. And let me see what I can because I've got a whole raft of papers in front of me from I printed like both because like the statistical analysis plan changed a number of times, so I thought I'll
Hmm.
just print off all of them. So I did to see what changed and what didn't.
And
I mean, we'll get to that. So in fact, I mean, we can start off with like looking at the figures or the tables because I mean, I'm going to
yeah.
start off by look because one of the interesting things is actually the patient baseline data. So I
Hmm.
mean, so they look at a lot of data. If I can check up, so like
Table one.
the big difference. So I mean, there are like so in the first part they look at the age of their groups. So the people in dexamethasone group
Hmm.
and the people in the normal like group. So they use a 2-to-1 ratio. So there's always double the amount of people in the placebo group compared to the people in the single group. And one of the things that the researchers noticed immediately was that the age of the people in the dexamethasone group was about a year older than the people in the other group, and that
Hmm.
and there's the idea that that might have an effect, and they might need to control for that, and we'll see a bit more about that, and also like they also look at like the status of the people when they enter the trial, like whether they're on oxygen, whether they want on oxygen, or whether they're on like invasive what the one where they stick a tube down your throat and breathe for
Invasive,
you.
yeah.
Uh,
That, hmm
yeah, mechanical
Yeah, that
ventilation.
that means that's called
Yeah.
intubation, right? Yeah, intubated.
So yeah, and there are some things like you'll notice about that group that tends to be a lot younger than the other groups because the people who because as you get older, the amount you can actually survive being intubated decreases. So you have to
Hmm.
take that
Yeah.
into account. And also, like the amount of time they've been in hospital tends to be a little longer because because you want to try everything before you stick a tube down someone's throat. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, also like once you get on that ventilation, like that might stabilize you, but then you have to get off of it.
yeah,
And so like I think that that decision plays into it as well. Like who's going to be able to get off this ventilation after this goes in?
yeah. Um, and then there's the other aspects of the study they look at, which
Number
are
is
um,
so, but in all, it's quite similar between the dexamethasone and the usual care group,
yeah,
right?
that's the interesting thing because seems like the actual like backgrounds of previous diseases seems to be roughly at least half of the dexamethasone group compared to the patient group, which is almost like too much what you'd expect from a group where you've got. But I mean, like again, since we're dealing with large groups, we do actually see effects like this because where like things do wrap up neatly into different where scaling of populations does work. Whereas if you're looking at a small group, you get more
Hmm.
random effects. It's so unusual to
Sure.
see like how like almost it is almost exactly double it almost matches the percentages match between each numbers, which is really impressive and really interesting. It's
Yeah.
because I guess the way they stratify the groups because the thing they note in their actual
Yeah, they made it they because it's already known that age is a factor, right? They make sure that the age is evenly
yeah,
distributed.
and also the way that they actually recruited their populations. So the control groups are always from hospitals where dexamethasone was an option. So,
Hmm.
so the idea for so like this is going to be a large arm study, and this control group is going to be used for all these other drugs, and they're always going
Hmm.
to be picking the controls matched to actual people who receive the drug, so that if from the same hospital, so that the actual like control group population will always mimic the population that will get the drug, which I thought was
Yeah, because if they split it between centers, then that means that like variations in the demographics between centers may be reflected in the demographics between the treatment
yeah.
allocation.
So they're basically trying to
Yep.
capture that variation and keep that variation equal between those two groups, which I found quite interesting,
Yep.
quite a neat sort of thing. Because then in each study, I would expect the control group to look different each time, even though they're using some of the same people. So that's
Hmm.
something that is kind of fascinating. But then we come to the actual outcomes. This is going to be, so I'm starting off with table two, where they look at things like mortality. Um, this is unlike other studies where we have nice graphs. So this study is mostly tables and numbers, which uh, can get a bit tiring after a while. But in terms of like actual like
Well, yeah, so the primary outcome that they're looking at is 28-day mortality, which is a great
yeah,
outcome, right? Because like a lot of clinical significance
yeah,
will go to like, will you be coming out of the hospital after 28 days?
yeah, and they do find a significant difference. They find that in one study there's I think like 21% mortality in the dexamethasone study and 24% in the usual care study, which it doesn't
Hmm.
sound that much, but actually in real terms that does make a real difference. Um,
Yeah.
and also,
And I think,
yeah,
well, I mean, I mean, this is part of it too, but a part of it is because also the drug is already out there, right? Already produced and made cheaply for lots of different people. So like seeing this like solid, significant effect, like with a drug that's out there, that's amazing, right?
yeah,
Because it's like, yeah.
yeah, and also like the amount of times people discharge. I mean, the rate of discharge is a bit higher in the same sort of proportion. So 64% versus 61%. So slightly more people, slightly
Hmm.
more time, which means more hospital beds open. So that kind of thing does build up. And
Yeah.
and other things like receiving mechanical ventilation, so less likely to receive mechanical ventilation or dying. So yeah,
Hmm.
you don't want to have either of those happening. So uh, that's a good thing. Um,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
but the thing is, those things aren't quite as significant as the other. So those ones might just be. So those don't have the same like kind of significance as the 28-day mortality. But the mortality bit is what we really care about. So now we're going to the Kaplan-Meier graphs, which
Yeah, I mean, these are classic sort of infectious disease graphs looking at people over time, right? Because um, as as the time goes on, different people are dropping out for different reasons, either because something complicated happens to them and their treatment has to change, right? Or they have progression on, or they die, right? I
yeah.
guess that's the other reason that they're gone.
So yeah, there's some data you censor out. So if someone is like hit by a car, then you don't really have their death
Hmm.
registered as a COVID death. But but so you just censor their data out. But all those like little steps represent like a number of people who have died and on that specific day, and
Right.
like they
But censoring is shown. I mean, it's or I think
yeah
isn't it?
they do
Or
censor
let's see.
some data. I don't know whether they show it or not.
Oh no, they don't show it.
Yeah
I thought I saw it, but it's a dotted line for
yeah
dexamethasone.
that
Weird choice.
yeah. Um, Yeah, and it's cumulative as well. So again, you can see that the actual death rate seems to be yeah. So
Yeah,
tapers off.
like sort of at each date, the that probability or the percentage of mortality is calculated,
Yeah,
right, based on who still remains in the study and who has left for different reasons.
yeah, and like well, yeah, and it looks so in this first so in A it looks uh like in terms of mortality u- usual care seems to weirdly like claim
Oh, so this is basically primary outcome from table two, but now stratified.
yeah
Yeah, by um oh, I see. By like how it could be like how bad their disease is kind of a way to think about it, right? Because they wouldn't be on these interventions if it wasn't bad to a certain point.
Yeah. So, like, in terms of usual care, tends to be so A is just all the participants in one big like kind of pool, and the usual care
Hmm.
is got more mortality than dexamethasone, which kind of indicates that dexamethasone works. Then they look in like
Hmm.
no oxygen received, where this is interesting, where the mortality in the dexamethasone group seems to be a bit larger, and
Hmm.
that's where the age comes in, I
Oxygen.
think.
Hmm.
So, because the population in the
Oxygen.
sorry the
Oh, sorry.
oh,
I was just saying it to myself.
oh yeah, sorry. I kept thinking I was talking over you. I feel bad when
No,
where I
no,
do
not at
that.
all.
But the idea here is that I mean this could be because of something dexamethasone is doing, if you're treating people who are already like relatively healthy or in a less severe stage, or it could be because the group that they have in the dexamethasone is more older and therefore more likely to die of the disease anyway. So if there's no effect, you'd still expect there to be slightly more mortality in that group. And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
the interesting thing is that they try to do some corrections in the baselines, and this is where me digging up the statistical analysis plan comes in, because
Oh, nice.
basically the day before they released the study, they updated their statistical analysis plan to include that adaptation. That they added like a paragraph that indicate more generically. Let's see where I can put it. To see if I can find it quickly. Yeah, so adjustment for baseline characteristics. So basically, they add this new paragraph that says that main analyses will be unadjusted for baseline characteristics. However, in the event that there are any important imbalances between the randomized group and key baselines, emphasis will be placed on analyses that are adjusted for the relevant baseline characteristics. So basically, like they're going to still show all the same data, but they're going to put the emphasis on analyses that can adjust for this characteristic. So
Mm.
and well, I mean, it's so I'm not sure exactly the degree like to which they were able to properly adjust for that because uh, again, it still seems like if you look at the results they present, there is some negativeness to the dexamethasone group that could easily be due to the age group, or even if there's their actual like kind of.
But it's also, I mean, but like the gap isn't statistically
No, it
significant.
isn't. So yeah,
So it could also just be
yeah,
noise.
that's
But I guess like you're seeing so many people. Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting thing to
yeah. The
see.
gap isn't statistically significant, but it's also not too far off of the other gaps which are significant. So that's why it's kind of.
Right.
So I mean, it's something to take note of and something that we need to like account for and explain. Like,
Yeah.
so I think that
Yeah, I mean, like, there's sort of the like this is the difference between effect size and statistical
yeah,
significance, right? Where like effect size, you're seeing like the difference between two groups, like how that spacing looks versus versus does the statistical test show that like next time you do it, would it come out the same way, sort of deal.
yeah,
Um,
and it might not come out
hmm,
that same way. It might just be due to
right,
the partitioning of that group. Um,
right,
but now we
right.
go to like C and D, where things get a lot more impressive. So the effect sizes for the oxygen group are a bit larger, and the effect sizes for people who have been invasively mechanically ventilated, their mortality seems to like go right down.
Yeah, I mean that effect size is
Yeah,
huge.
that looks really good. That's some good effect size. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, which is really impressive. And the next study one they show is the this
Yeah.
diagram that essentially show, because the thing about those graphs is that they can't show the confidence intervals, which is a bit of a problem because you can't really see the whole like kind of the 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 diversity and the variation as well in those.
Hmm.
So
Well, yeah, like I mean, confidence intervals sort of directly speak to effect size because, like, maybe there's a big gap, but the statistics say that they overlap at some level, right? That like that hits a huge gap, but it's likely there's a probability that they could just overlap. So yeah, so I mean, it's just it's a better way of showing the effect size than reading it off the graph, right?
yeah,
Like looking at those gaps, we can say those are big, but really we don't have the statistics to know. Seeing the confidence intervals, we would.
exactly. We don't know like if because those gaps might be big, but if the like variation is big, then those gaps don't
Exactly.
mean anything. And so
Yep.
having a graph like in Figure 2 actually makes things a lot more clearer, and so you can see
Yes.
that I mean it still
Agreed.
shows like that no oxygen received doesn't seem to that shows that usual care is better for no oxygen received. And dexamethasone,
But you can see that the effect size, right, overlaps with one
yeah,
where there is no difference, right? So like
exactly,
that's giving us that idea that like, oh, because the bar has that, it's like, it could just be noise,
yeah,
right? Like could be something that if you powered it more, it would have happened, right? But like ultimately maybe you don't have to think too much about it.
yeah. And it could just be because of that age effect. Because I mean, they give us the
Hmm.
mean, but we don't know how skewed that population is. If it's very skewed, so that there's
Hmm.
like a few very old people in that population, then that would actually create a skew in the data. So I mean,
Hmm.
we're treating it like it's a normalized data, but the people going into like these wards aren't necessarily representative of the whole population. They are a subset, and
Right.
so they
Right.
might like not show a normal distribution. They might be kind of skewed to one end and
Hmm.
have a few people on the other one, and so that could be
Yeah, I mean, that's hilarious. But like, there's like that's like a common criticism, anyways, of statistics done in this
mm,
style, right? Is that like it doesn't take into account those pieces of information, and all you can say is that like, I could introduce some variance
yeah,
here, but like knowing precisely what that might be is like not accounted for in the model, basically,
yeah,
the statistical
and
model.
which is why it's always good to have like the data like visible and to hand because then
Yeah,
you can actually see the
yeah.
distribution and then
But again, for takeaway points, right? Like if we're focusing on like the effect sizes that matter and like that that have clear effects, right? Then we can take away that at least it's very good in certain
yeah,
circumstances, right? Oxygen only and invasive mechanical ventilation.
yeah, and I think in those circumstances they're the high stakes circumstances where like it's life or death in that
Yeah.
situation, not whether can I go to work or can I not go to work, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And I feel like the paper was written in a way that sort of leads you down. It reports this clinical outcome, but then it can't help itself but talk about like, like why that might happen, and also speak to there was like I guess a thought that steroids were not good to
Yeah.
give to people, and so like right like they sort of try to speak to that issue that like yeah we know that like there was this, but like did they have data, were they able to show things, right? And then also emphasizing that they are just giving this drug specifically in this like very critical state, right, where they see the effect. It's not like, oh, you come in with these symptoms, let's put you on this drug, right? Let's there's the right point in which to give this treatment, and the data are suggesting that point.
Yeah. I think it like goes.
Right, which is when you're in a more critical condition.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to what I was. I mean, remember when we discussed this? We talked about. I did say that dexamethasone is obviously anti-remdesivir, like where like remdesivir it's best when you give it early and like then you see effects, whereas dexamethasone is like kind of final stage, last, but you might.
Yeah, exactly.
And with
Yeah, like your body hasn't been able to control this infection in a way, right? It's running away from you. You know, your lungs are filling up with fluid.
Yeah.
They're like, right, like doctors are like in some ways like very mechanical when they're going through these actions, right? It's like, oh my goodness, like this person isn't getting oxygen anymore, right? Like there's going to be an issue. So yeah, it's nice to have an option when you get to that stage, right? You actually have like a drug intervention that can help.
Yeah.
And again, very cool because it's a cheap, right?
Yes.
It's a like there's a lot of it. It's inexpensive. There's that small subtle suggestion that it could also be just a general effect of corticosteroids given at this point, right? Because there's some flexibility in how the study was done.
Yeah.
Mineral corticoids, I think, is the term.
Yeah, and it's kind of. I mean, that's why it's so hopeful and why a lot of people are talking about it because it does show quite an impressive like demonstration, and like no one's going to be able to buy up all the stocks of dexamethasone because so it's
Yeah, there's already generics.
yeah,
There's already
it's already
generics.
generic, and it's I mean it's so generic that it could even though I'm studying, think well why not try other steroids like that's and yeah
Hmm.
I'm biased into believing that it can work
But
so yeah
it's kind of interesting though. Like I think it's important to think though, like that, or like in the context of the papers that we talked about today, right? Like this is a phase 3 study of something that's already approved,
yeah
right? And is done like in a very different style. In some ways, that's not really that congruous in terms of if we are thinking about the whole like the ways drugs get through. Like this study feels a lot more to me like supporting doctors' decisions.
yeah
Like it's not about like can we get this drug out there, but like what are we even supposed to be doing?
yeah I mean it's never going to be as exciting as like a first try at a randomly new amazing drug. This has always been
Yeah.
something that's been familiar, it's tried and tested. It hasn't got that same like novelty like value that let's say a vaccine that electrocutes you or like the
Yes, yes, yes.
or like
But no, but I mean, never have we haven't even talked about phase 3 before,
yeah
right? Like, I think the whole idea is that by the time you get to doing these studies, right, there's already very clear understandings of what you're looking for and what good and bad means,
yeah
right? Right, because like we looked at these other preclinical things, like people don't know what the clinical endpoint is that they're going to end up studying, right? Like,
yeah
of course, like 28-day mortality, actually gathering data on that is the most like impactful information that someone could hear, right? So that even, I mean, we know this disease is quite terrible in these people who are seriously ill, 20% of people aren't making it out,
yeah
right? But that reduction of a few percent against like a huge population of people, that's going to be meaningful. And having the knowledge that that's the way to go, like the strong support for this methodology of treatment is like a really useful tool when you're a doctor and going down that
yeah
path.
and like I mean it's amazing like you can get a sense of how big the study is because the first like 20 pages of the supplementary material is a list of all the people who were involved in it uh,
Hmm.
which is just like it's just amazing and like lists pretty much a lot of like hospitals all over the country. This was a massive endeavor and it's still ongoing. I mean they
Yeah.
hopefully that we're gonna
Yeah, there's still maybe stuff to learn or associations to pull out. I mean, so this is like again interesting, right? Because good studies, you're supposed to embed all those endpoints ahead of time so you can power
mm,
things. But I got the sense from reading this paper that they have like a basically an ongoing review process,
Yeah.
right? To say like, oh, okay, you want to look at this? Well, then let's reopen the question of how many people do you need to enroll? How are you going to enroll them? And like in that way, it's like it continues to go. And like that's like you can never really communicate that well on the clinicaltrials.gov
Mm.
site because like the clinicaltrials.gov site is like it's for this like one thing that happens,
Yeah.
right? But that's not how this study is being designed because again, it's a little bit different. They're like I see it a lot of like organizing a nationalized healthcare system in order to, again, give flexibility for doctors to do what they want, but collect the right pieces of information from all of that activity in order to then inform guidelines that go forward. Right? Like it's like such a different, it's a very different beast in some ways. But yeah, it would definitely fall under the category of phase 3 in that sense.
Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Kind of like an ongoing or like a it's kind of like a it's a clinical trial that's just going to keep going.
yeah.
Right, like
I mean,
yeah,
this statistical analysis plan. I mean, this isn't just for dexamethasone; it's for all the other things. So that
right.
update they did just before they released this is going to apply to all the other drugs they're testing, and that's going to and they're
Yep.
going to keep updating and changing it. And so
Right.
I mean, when they actually like kind of they point you to this document, which is of course continuously updating and advancing as this study is going. So it's
hmm
it
Yeah, but the fact that they pinched off a piece to tell us this interim means that, right, like means that they are seeking to change recommendations with clinical
yeah.
practice, right? Like we've seen a lot of data now, right? Like they're laying it out in front of us that they've taken a very careful approach to adapt to these changing things, right? And now they're ready to present something that could change your mind on what you do in the clinic. Like if you were a doctor,
Yeah.
that doesn't change my mind. I mean, I just trust what the doctor
Yeah.
does, but like change the mind of a doctor.
Yeah, and it's amazing what they can like come up with. I mean, yeah,
hmm
I mean, and the amount of work they have to do already in this, and the fact they found the time to do this as well is it's amazing. I think it speaks to what we're talking about in the previous like section, where this is not just a test of like whether we can make about the vaccines we make, but how quickly we can make them, how quickly we can test them, and this is kind of one of those things that I think people will look back up in future years when other pandemics come up as a model for developing new treatments.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, no, I would say like this is, well, this is a weirder one, right? Because in this sense, you could only do it if you have lots of people flowing through a single healthcare system.
Mm.
So it's unique in that like it has to be done, right? Where you can coordinate multi-centers. You can do the study in the States, right? Like every hospital is going to be bound by all these like insurance
Mm.
issues and like privacy concerns. Like no one would be able to gather this data across all these different people and hopefully the next time it never gets to this point where like so many people are flowing through the system that like we're able to study, right, like something with this type of mortality.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I
um
realize that you. I keep forgetting that you're in the US and not everyone has the
yeah.
NHS.
Yeah. So like to me, it's like I see like the global significance. The,
Mm.
the reason why I see it being exciting in the news because it has a certain type of global significance in like a type of right. It's a Western
Mm.
country, right? I think that's part of it as well, right? A large Western country that has organized right its healthcare potential to give recommendations to everybody, right? Because like the idea is that like um, something that could bounce around your mind is that why did it not happen in China, right? Where like at that point, like where was the recovery study in that healthcare system, right? And it's because like the organization didn't come together in the same way, right? Like Bill and Melinda Gates, all the people who funded the study, they weren't interested in coming together, right? So and dealing with Chinese authorities to organize their hospital system because ostensibly the data could have come from there as well,
Yeah,
right? Then it impacts the Western world, and there's a bit more concern. But also, where can it be done? Well, the UK.
yeah,
So like it's very cool to see this happen. I'm very happy that they're able to do it, but I also think that like hopefully there's it still is a bit reactionary in my
mm.
mind, right? Like there are better ways to respond to emerging infectious diseases than mobilizing a healthcare system where essentially doctors are just doing their
Mm.
job, right? And being able to statistically analyze that information to recommend things to do for other doctors. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's cynical, right?
Yeah.
There's a cynical edge to that, right? Like I'm just like, oh, this is great, but like ideally we'd never get to this
Yeah.
point.
If only we never had
Or like
like.
maybe yeah, or no, or maybe that's the challenge too to these types of
Mm,
organizations. Like, you know, it's not just the NIH that funded it. There's tons of people that
mm,
came together to do this organization, right? Because like you need lots of money and people understanding how to do these statistical analyses, right? And like how to design things. And that organization just wasn't applied earlier in the course of this outbreak.
yeah.
And maybe because, you know, I don't know how it is to work with the Chinese hospital system. I'm sure there's a whole other set of concerns there where it wasn't able to happen, right? Like the organizations that are funding this are UK
Yeah.
organizations, right? So it's like it's the like the UK nonprofit group, right? And like for profit, or maybe not for profit, nonprofit university structure, right? That is interacting with a healthcare system, a unique healthcare system, and that's what we're seeing come out of this.
I mean, the hope is that like something like that. I mean, because the Pfizer study, like we were discussing in the previous work, that had loads of hospitals attached to it, and like the hope is that like that better. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not speaking about the U.S. system,
well,
which I know
it's
nothing about. So, uh,
Yeah, no, but I'm saying, but they're fundamentally different. You know, like that's why I'm saying, like we talked about phase. Like I was hoping we'd have this arc, right, of phase one and phase
mm,
two across these two things, but it's a little bit different because of the way that this phase three study is being
yeah,
done, right? It's phase three by definition,
mm,
but in some ways it's being set up to advise, to provide ongoing advisement,
yeah,
right, to the global community based on the experiences of the UK.
yeah,
And like that, to me, that's like a very different outlook
mm,
than what a regular clinical trial, how a regular clinical trial is set up, where it's set up to show us the effect of a specific object, right?
yeah,
Like, whatever, to get through a regulatory hurdle. Here, it's kind of like, it's clear that they've set it up a little bit differently.
yeah.
That it's like more about like gathering guidances and again like healthcare system, advising the doctors in the system as well as outside of the system.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, this is a unique thing because I mean, I guess it is mostly like something that UK does a lot because we try to find cost-effective treatments rather than like most effective ones. So we often
Mm-hmm.
looking at
Mm-hmm.
things like generics and running studies like this to find the most important treatment outcomes. And well,
Yeah, I guess I actually I don't even know the history. Like
oh,
if these types of large studies have been done before on the healthcare
we've got this
system.
thing, this society called the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, which were basically they're there to find whether not just whether things work, but whether they were cost effective. Uh,
Yeah.
so like so because NHS is a massive like buying like kind of they
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
choice of
Yeah.
what they buy is very important. So they want to make sure they get the most money from it. So that sort of kind of aspect you can see that kind of idea in this study where they're looking at a whole bunch of things and
And not to throw too much shade on Gilead, but like you can see from the strategy that's being taken, right? Being like, well, why would we want to mobilize a lot of drug to get into this study when we already have very favorable data in another source, right? So like we'll just sell it for what we can, right? Like it's kind of taking a sort of a different route, right? They don't really care about the NHS buying
yeah.
potential here.
And I'm pretty sure that like this study isn't. I mean, they've got like a couple of antivirals on this. They even got like an antibiotic in this study, but I'm not sure that this is
Hmm.
the study that'll be most favourable to those. That it's not the situation where those would like have their
Yep.
best effect. So I,
Yeah. I think that's another really good point is that like although it's like set up to be this advisement thing, it has a very strict set of criteria in which people will get in. So the types of advisements it's going to be giving is always for these critically
yeah,
ill, right? Is always again, and that's why I'm saying like I don't like thinking that this is like setting up for the next time we see this because because it's like it's advising us like what to do when we're already in this really bad sort of
yeah,
situation where like I think I would hope that in future pandemics the infection control side of it would be better,
yeah,
right? Where
true.
it's like we wouldn't have gotten to this point
Like
where this gets
yeah,
deployed, right? Because
yeah,
like the vaccine thing would have always been deployed.
mm,
Like if there was an outbreak and it was under control, we'd still have to find a vaccine.
yeah,
Right? But like we would not necessarily have to find things to deal with like incredibly ill patients flooding hospitals.
yeah.
Yeah.
I take your point there that we that this is kind of very much like the Titanic sinking and like already. So
Yeah, it's a very impressive. Again, I want to stress. I think it's very impressive, and again, that it's creating data that's very very useful for
yeah,
people. But yeah, I don't want to think that this is like the way a model for the way things should go
you'd
down.
rather like not hit the iceberg rather than to have to use all the lifeboats or have the right number of lifeboats.
Yeah,
Just missing
yeah,
like
exactly.
this one is like, oh,
Yeah,
we'll have the right number of lifeboats next time the boat sinks. And like, how about not having the boat sink? And
yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure,
yeah,
for sure.
um,
But yeah, very exciting and exciting. I think actually, here's another thing, right? Where it's like maybe this is right. Maybe you're right. Now I'm playing my devil's advocate on my own
oh
side,
no, you're
right?
twisting my melon.
But I know, but like think about countries that maybe don't have a lot of
Hmm.
infrastructure, right, to do that type of infection control, right? So like people talk about outbreaks in poor Latin American countries or in Africa, right? How are their healthcare systems going to deal with it, right? In some ways, like having this data is like very relevant to these places because like this is they may not have been able to control those outbreaks, and then here's a great way to make sure that the hospital systems are working fine,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Stay
I
working.
mean,
And even if they haven't experienced an outbreak, knowing that this is the way to get people out of the hospital faster, right, is gonna help, right?
yeah,
But yeah, I don't know. Seeing that 20%, I'm just like, God,
yeah.
that's
No,
that's horrible.
yeah. Because we're still
It's a
not okay
lot of
with that. We are not okay with.
a lot of the
Yeah, want
percentage is
to make
high.
clear that is not no sort of death is acceptable, but like kind of yeah,
Yeah,
it's great
yeah,
that this is lessening the death the amount of death, but like we're still like oh shit, this is still really not great. But yeah,
yeah, yeah, but incredibly useful information.
yeah. On that somewhat like
Yeah.
nuanced note, I feel like I think we've basically said all we need to say on this.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Really cool. I want to see another report come from the recovery
Oh yeah,
study
yeah.
so we can talk about it
Then I
again.
can read. Then I have to print off more of these reports to keep up to date with what's changed. Oh,
Yeah. Well, if anyone who's joined us wants to talk about something or wants to see us talk about things, please tweet us at our personal or down below or at the hashtag up
yeah.
above. Am I pointing the right
Yeah.
way? Yeah, we're gonna continue to do this, and we're having a good time doing it.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. Thank you very much for joining me. Hopefully, I'll see you next week where we'll be talking about all sorts of things in the news. So,
Yep,
uh,
doing our selection chat.
yeah. Well, see you next week.